Let's go. We're heading out. We have a stop to make before starting patrol. At the beginning, Damien, of everything. Today on the Comic Book Report, Batman and Robin by Peter J. Tomasi and Patrick Gleason Omnibus. Stick around and check it out. Greetings from Gotham, everyone. My name is Dominic, and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I've got a real treat for you all with the Batman and Robin Tomasi Gleason run. I cannot wait to dive in today. But before we do, just a quick shout out to our channel sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're looking to pick up your own comic book collected editions, definitely check out their website. If you see something you like, you can even use my discount code, TheComicBookReport, at checkout to receive $2 off of your order. Please note, if you use my affiliate code or the link in my description to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a great way to support the channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's get started with today's Batman review. First, some quick facts about today's collection. The issues in this volume were written primarily by Peter J. Tomasi and illustrated primarily by Patrick Gleason. The comics in this volume were published by DC Comics beginning in 2011. The volume itself collects Batman and Robin issues 20 through 22, Batman and Robin the New 52 series issues 0 through 40, as well as issue 23.1 and annuals issues 1 through 3. Robin Rises Omega issue 1, Robin Rises Alpha issue 1, and stories from Secret Origins issue 4 and Detective Comics 27. Finally, this oversized hardcover edition comes in at 1,214 pages. At this time, I'd like to issue a general spoiler warning. I will be flipping through the contents of today's collection and commenting on plot points throughout. You've been advised. Okay, and here's our first look at that Batman and Robin Omnibus. So like I mentioned earlier, this does contain the New 52 Batman and Robin series, along with a couple other issues tied in there. I absolutely love this collection, love the look of the dust jacket. That front cover is just stunning. The spine is really cool with the black and yellow, and fun enough, this actually matches in a way the Superman Omnibus from Tomasi and Gleason. That omnibus is red with kind of a yellow print font, but the style matches up with this perfectly, so if you're a fan of Tomasi and Gleason, it's cool to have that pair of omnibus on the shelf. We got the back cover here with a nice picture of Batman below all the verbiage. Really, really cool. I like that you already get a stylistic impression of Gleason from this dust jacket. Always a nice facet for these collections. Now I'm going to take a moment to inspect this dust jacket a little bit closer. We'll take a look at the interior flaps before transitioning to look at the under the dust jacket art they printed on the hardback book itself. But again, like I said, I love this dust jacket. I love all the black. We have several images of Batman and Robin, which is absolutely applicable for a Batman and Robin book, obviously. But I really like the art they chose. I think it just looks really stylish. The art really, really pops. And I was overall just so ecstatic when I saw the look of this book. The Under the Dust Jacket artwork is also similarly great. We have some more Batman and Robin and some of the Bat family. They also reproduced the spine on the spine of the hardback itself, which is an interesting choice rather than having one unbroken wraparound image. But I do still think it's a really cool layout. I know I'll do the spread here in just a second so you can see what it looks like and see what I'm talking about, but already a really, really cool design for this book, and I can't wait to dive in and show you some of the issues and more awesome artwork from Gleason. The hardback is very shiny, so let me try to get an image without the glare, but again, a really great collection here, so well put together. Love these oversized omnibus editions. And now I want to show you a quick look at the sewn binding for this omnibus. This is a really big book, but overall I had a great experience with the binding. We even have a bit of an eye with this edition, which is really nice to see. This book is certainly packed out. I love the oversized glossy print pages, always a good feature for these books. Really well put together in my opinion. And now we can go ahead and dive into the collection proper. I do like the end pages when you first open up this book. We also have a great title page, but one of my favorite features about this book is we have a proper table of contents with all of the issues, where applicable, the story name, and of course the page number. This is a feature I absolutely love, especially for a modern omnibus, to have a book that's completely mapped in the table of contents with a page number that you can index really easily. I just love it, and I think that this is a great feature of this book, and it really started me on a great foot as I just jumped into the reading here. I will say we get started with Batman and Robin towards the tail end of the Batman and Robin series prior to the relaunch with New 52, but I think these issues were also Gleason and Tomasi, and it was a really fun story. We have the Bruce Wayne, Damian Wayne, Batman and Robin team, and honestly, it was an adventure I had never read. It was such a fun story to kick off this book. Kind of a creepy story, actually. It introduced this villain that was sort of using this light, and there was a lot of angelic imagery, but it was really a sinister concept, kind of a dark crime thriller with some like borderline supernatural motifs. Really, really a fun way to start the book. That was a handful of issues, a really zippy, fun read that gets you going right away. Ton of action. I do think that this collection feels more like the Tomasi Gleason run you expect once you really get into those New 52 issues. But that first story is still a ton of fun. I like the introduction of that new light-based villain. It was definitely unusual, definitely a little different. And for me, it was a surprise having that in this book because I actually thought this run began with New 52. So that was an added treat that I had no idea until I bought the omnibus. After that story arc, though, we jump right into the New 52 issues, and there's really not that much of a kind of shift, other than I feel like the focus is put much more on the father-son dynamic between Bruce and Damian. I really love that. I had heard about it with this run, that this is really a father and son kind of book, and I think it was one of its best features. I think that there were a lot of surprising twists and turns throughout this whole run, but at its core, this is really a father-son story with a lot of superheroics and Batman goodness thrown in for good measure. I will say too, toward the beginning of this video, that I think that this is a fantastic run for new readers. You really don't need to know that much about Batman and his mythos to appreciate this book. It certainly helps if you know who Damian Wayne is, the son of Batman, but beyond that, anyone can kind of just pick up this book and enjoy the ride. I will say that as we get into the New 52, that's an era of comics that can sometimes be polarizing over at DC, but it's one of my personal favorites. That era was when I really started collecting comics by myself, on my own, so it really has a special place in my heart. I actually reviewed the first maybe 7 issues or so of the New 52 Batman and Robin run we see here in this omnibus on my channel as part of the Volume 1 before I upgraded to this omnibus edition. So if you're interested in just the first story arc in this book, you can definitely check out that review. Otherwise, on with the show here. The first arc that we get from New 52 is a really incredible story where this figure that's kind of loosely affiliated with Bruce Wayne's past and his training before he became Batman rolls into town and is trying to wreak his own kind of vigilante lethal justice around Gotham City. He's trying to also influence young Damian, who has a much more edgy outlook, having been raised by assassins. His kind of criminal justice, like his whole methodology and ideology for that, is still definitely impressionable and being shaped. We have his upbringings with the Al Ghuls over by the League of Shadows, League of Assassins, that is much more lethal force, cruel, calculated. And then we have Batman's influence, which is, can still be cruel and calculated, but is at least non-lethal. And we have him kind of coming to grips with who he is and kind of which kind of ideas he should follow. So the introduction of this person from Bruce's past and how he influences Damian was a really interesting subplot. Like I said, right from the beginning of this New 52 era, there's so much great kind of father and son ideas and kind of the themes and this idea of where do you go for mentorship and what is that relationship paradigm supposed to look like. And I really like it because it's not as much beat you over the head with these messagings. It's just really a solid story that has some cool father-son values kind of sprinkled in throughout. I really love the artwork from Gleason. This is really my first exposure to him as an artist, if memory serves, having those first couple issues of his New 52 run. He has a really good balance between kind of an animated style and something that feels more edgy and realistic in some ways, but it's really stylized. I don't really know how to describe it. I love how dark his shadows can be. I really love the way it has kind of this larger than life feel to it. There's almost a surrealism to some of his artwork sometimes, I feel like even if the character models look really refined and tuned in and good, there is this kind of like dreamy, creepy aspect he can kind of fall into that I think is just so great for Batman and Gotham City and some of these villains. And yet somehow he can also perfectly balance this kind of intimate character sweetness, like in those father and son moments and those really impactful emotional moments we get throughout this run. And the fact that he can do that and the kind of intense creep factor at the same time is just spellbinding to me. And I think, again, perfectly flavored for a Batman book. As we continue to make our way through, I do want to just highlight a couple story arcs that were really meaningful for me, but the first thing I want to touch on before I get more into that is that there is a great kind of tie-in issue to Court of Owls that's sort of Damian hunting down one of the Talons, kind of one of the agents of the Court of Owls. I think that this is a really great kind of standalone issue that does tie into that event. It really is Damian kind of going on this solo mission. We get to see kind of his tactical genius, and we get a lot kind of character depth in that issue, which is a lot of fun. The Court of Owls is one of my favorite story arcs from the Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo era of Batman. At any rate, I actually bring this up to say this brings me to really my only complaint about this omnibus on the whole, which is that this book feels like a companion book sometimes whenever it approaches some of the big happenings within the DC universe. And I want to explain that. When you have something like the Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo Batman run and the end of the Grant Morrison kind of Batman Incorporated run, the same time this book is going, I feel like this book was given kind of the short end of the stick. And what I mean by that, I can use the Court of Owls issue as an example. We really, other than the tie-in that we have Damian fighting one of the Talons, we don't get the broader context of what happens in the Court of Owls. To get that, you really have to read that Scott Snyder, Greg Capullo run, or at least the Court of Owls storyline. I think in some omnibuses that have tie-ins to events, especially at Marvel, I sometimes see a little paragraph before an issue or a blurb that kind of gives you the exposition or sort of plot synopsis or context details so that when you're reading a story that's a tie-in and you don't have the rest of the event, you can kind of get a sense of where it fits and what this is serving, like narratively, but we don't really have that in this book. So you're reading your storylines and all of a sudden there'll be a tie-in to that issue. Or you'll have things like when it ties into the Snyder Capullo Death of the Family story arc, there'll be some images calling back to that issue. We'll have maybe a tie-in, but we don't have the narrative of what really happened there. Sometimes they'll throw it in here or there in a panel, but there's not really that kind of exposition. Luckily, I had read that run. I read Grant Morrison's run, so I knew these things they were referencing, but I think someone who wants to read this from the beginning, which I do recommend, I still think it's new reader friendly. My only qualification is that there is some times where you can get lost with bigger plot details that correspond to other stories from other runs. So I said that with Court of Owls and Death of the Family. The other big one here, and this influences a really, really big shift in this book. So again, I gave a spoiler warning, but here we go. In Batman Incorporated, the Grant Morrison era, there's a really big event that happens where Damian actually loses his life in battle, which obviously directly impacts a series called Batman and Robin, where Damian Wayne is that aforementioned Robin. Because that happens in the Batman Incorporated run and not here in the Batman and Robin run, we actually don't even see it happening. We have an issue where Damian's doing Damian stuff, and the next issue he is dead. He is gone, and we have Batman mourning. There's actually a whole issue where Batman and everyone is completely silent, and it's a really beautiful, wonderful issue. You definitely understand contextually from that Damian is gone, but you don't actually get to see what happens. You don't really have a clue, and I just feel for an omnibus that is otherwise amazing. One of my favorite Batman omnibuses I've ever read. I think it would have been a benefit to, if not having those issues included, at least having a paragraph blurb that fills in the details, because otherwise we go from issue to issue with no explanation. But there are a major just narrative and character shifts that occur effectively off screen or off panel because they're happening in some of these other big Batman books, but they directly affect this run. And so I think that that's the only hard part about this run and about this omnibus in general. Because those story arcs are so amazing, I wish we would have had things that explain them a little bit more for people that only want to read this book. I really am not going to talk about every storyline in this book because there's so much to cover, and I do want to leave some mystery for those that want to read this book for themselves. But I think one thing that Gleason and Tomasi excel at throughout their run, especially in the beginning of the run, is using characters that they either create themselves or are really underutilized in the DC universe and the Batman universe. We don't have the same rogues gallery of villains that Batman commonly fights for a lot of this run. Like I said, it starts with that villain who's kind of a light, kind of monstrous dude. We have another villain that's kind of a zombie, or this guy that's sort of decaying, that kind of has a really fun story arc in here. And there are things like that they're their own kind of created villains. We don't just have Joker story after Joker story, and I think that was something I really liked about this book. While these villains he created were a ton of fun, I do feel like it put the emphasis back on Batman and Robin, which is really the narrative core of the story, and I like that. The villains were definitely interesting, engaging, intriguing, but I do feel like the emphasis was more on Batman and Robin. So that is something else to note about this. If you're a fan of stories that are more villain-centric, this is really not the run for you. But that being said, the villains are still very fun and interesting. After Damian passes, we have Bruce Wayne entering into a very dark season. For me, it's reminiscent of the Death in the Family story arc where Batman loses Jason Todd's Robin, but it hits a little bit deeper in one way because this is his own flesh and blood child. And to see him go through that process is really heartbreaking, especially when this book has been so centered on that father and son dynamic. The degree of loss, grief, anger, and failure that Bruce feels is something that is absolutely explored in these issues in a way I found to be so profound. In fact, I actually think the exploration of the post-Damian Bruce Wayne, I think that this run does it better than any of the other competing Batman titles of the time. And I think that there's good reason for that, again, because this book was all about Batman and Robin. So the loss is really keenly felt, and frankly, this becomes basically a Batman book for a large chunk of the run because Damian is gone. One of the first things that happens after he's gone is a story arc that kind of goes through the 5 stages of loss or grief. We have bargaining and acceptance and, the other ones in there. But each issue has Batman kind of teaming up with one of the Bat family members. We have him teaming up with Batgirl for an issue, Red Hood for an issue, Tim Drake. We have Catwoman teaming up with him. And it's each kind of stressing a point in the grief process for Batman. And we see him really frayed at the edge. He does some really kind of messed up stuff to each of those characters. Sometimes outright betrayal, but more of the times just really selfish actions that twist or push them past their point of kind of comfort or things that they feel is okay. So it's really Batman at not his most virtuously kind of shining example Batman. This is a very hurt, grieving, and reactive Batman. But I think it really made sense for the character, and those issues were some of my favorite in the book for just how much emotional depth we got to hit as he struggled with loss and death. Another notable inclusion during that era is this kind of feeling that Batman is trying to resurrect or bring his son back by any means necessary. This puts him on a direct kind of intersection with the character of Frankenstein, who is a fun DC character that was kind of being put back into view during New 52. He, of course, was in the DC universe before that, but this run really utilized Frankenstein, or Frankenstein's monster for literary fans out there. At any rate, he is prevalent in this book, appearing a handful of times, but one of the things that Batman tries to do after losing Damian is to figure out what Dr. Frankenstein did to bring Frankenstein's monster to life, hoping that he can imbue his son with the same sense of life now that he's gone. This leads to a really dark story where he tries to basically dissect Frankenstein alive to kind of get these answers. Again, an example of him kind of going too far to try to help with this grief and to try to bring his son back, before ultimately admitting that he's gone. That couple issues as he goes through the grief process with different members of the Bat family was also really well timed because it happened shortly after the death of the family story arc, again from the Snyder Capullo Batman era, and that story basically culminated with Batman keeping a secret from members of the Bat family, so the relationships were already strained. So in the midst of that, when you have him losing his son and then further straining the relationships with the Bat family, I just think it was really well done. I love that Tomasi and Gleason capitalized on the timing of these big events. I feel like they really pivoted well to all of these other big happenings in the other Batman titles of the time, and still giving us such a great read in their own book here. Another really great story arc we get during this period where Damian's no longer in the book is sort of a Two-Face. It's one part Two-Face origin story, but also just a general Two-Face story. I really enjoyed this because this was one of the big bad Batman villains that featured prominently in this book. This was a several issue story arc, and it was a lot of fun. Basically, a character from Bruce Wayne's past as a child comes back into the picture. She's part of a notorious crime family who's on a direct collision course with Two-Face, having been heavily involved in the creation of Two-Face, a la the acid on his face. And it was just a really interesting integration for a new character into the Batman mythos. Again, this is for New 52. I know a lot of people aren't fans of this story arc for the way it kind of changes Two-Face's origin, introduces this new character, but I for one thought it was a ton of fun. I liked getting to know the New 52's version of Two-Face. There were a lot of really powerful moments between Batman and Two-Face that I thoroughly enjoyed, and I think the exploration of some of this other character that Bruce happened to know as a child was really interesting. We got to see Matches Malone, Bruce Wayne's sort of alter ego character that he uses to do some detective and reconnaissance work. I love seeing that appearance of Matches in a prison at one point in that story arc. A ton of fun. I think the art for the Two-Face issue was also really well done. We have a lot of interesting visual symmetry. I think the color palette with a lot of reds, just really fascinating. I think the art style from Gleason is really consistently great throughout, but there was something special with these Two-Face issues that really made them feel set apart in this collection. I think this also, again, felt like a very, very Batman solo story, which in a Batman and Robin omnibus was kind of refreshing to see, because there's so many stories with Batman and Robin, or where Robin is felt, even if he's not physically there, as far as the grieving kind of showing up in a lot of the issues. But seeing a kind of just straight up Two-Face Batman story in this book, I think it lent a lot of variety to this collection, where I felt like I still got straight up Batman action in a Batman and Robin book. Wow, I mean, just look at this art. It's so hard not to just marvel at what Gleason accomplishes here. Again, this was my first exposure to Gleason as an artist, but I've really been wowed by a lot of the stuff I've seen from him recently. I actually have that other Superman omnibus I mentioned at the beginning of this video, and it's really fascinating to see this style put on a Superman story. We have a lot more of the kind of heartfelt art rather than just the straight up creepier, grotesque, monstrous art we see with a lot of the Batman art here from Gleason, which is also stunning, and that does show up in the Superman book as well. But again, just such a gifted artist with a lot of range, and this book was just so beautiful to look through as I was reading. One of the last major story arcs I want to talk about within this book, I believe, is called Robin Rises, but essentially it's the return of Damian Wayne. So this is toward the back end of the book, one of the final stories. Basically, Ra's al Ghul, I'm not really sure the best way to pronounce that. Basically, Damian's grandfather is really bent on trying to resurrect Damian and his daughter Talia al Ghul. To that end, he actually steals both of their bodies and their caskets from Batman's cemetery in order to try to find Lazarus pits with enough power to bring them back from the dead. To do that, he's actually trying to find special pits or special areas throughout the DC universe to basically bring them back. There are several issues in this arc, but they're all really fun, and this again pits Batman against one of his normal Rogues Gallery villains in Ra's al Ghul, and I really enjoyed it. This was also a really great way to showcase some of the Justice League members, as one Lazarus pit is found somewhere on Themyscira, the paradise island of the Amazons with Wonder Woman. So very, very cool issue there where Batman teams up with Wonder Woman to go try to stop Ra's al Ghul over there. There were a lot of fun little Easter eggs that tied into the Brian Azzarello, Cliff Chiang, New 52 Wonder Woman run as well. A really, really great issue. We have a couple different issues like that go to different characters, different Justice League members. At one point, he's actually teamed up back with Frankenstein again. This time they're teaming up to try to stop Ra's from doing this horrible thing. At any rate, the story ultimately culminates with representatives from Apocalypse boom tubing and showing up in front of Ra's and Batman, forcing them to team up because these guys, for whatever reason, want Damian's body because it has some kind of imbued crystal thing that Darkseid needs or something. At any rate, there's a huge battle that ensues. I think the Justice League even shows up. It's a really epic battle, but ultimately they take Damian's body to Apocalypse, and now Batman is absolutely on a mission to get his son back, to have him buried properly. But during this, we find out that Batman has access to something I think called the Hellbat armor. That's basically a super-powered Batman suit, basically, that's run off of Batman's metabolism. It's kind of locked up in the Watchtower, the Justice League satellite headquarters, and basically Batman's trying to get it and trying to find his way to Apocalypse to bring his son's body back. The Justice League doesn't want to do that. They don't want to justify, sending Batman and jeopardizing the planet or something. Batman really doesn't care. Even though the Justice League tell him no, he goes ahead and steals that armor. Also, in part thanks to the Bat family, who he briefs on everything. He basically apologizes in his way and gets their help to distract the Justice League so he can steal this armor. And lo and behold, Batman goes to Apocalypse to take his son's body back. There are some complications here, and we actually have the Bat family coming to join him, or members of them at least, to join him over in Apocalypse. There's this crazy epic battle or sequence of battles. We have Bruce Wayne just pushed to the very limits at Apocalypse, almost dying himself. Before realizing he found a way to get his son back, he uses this weird crystal that already has some kind of link with Damian, and he ultimately is able to bring his son back. And then they return from Apocalypse, and here we go, Damian is back. And for a while, he even has Superman-like powers, able to fly, super strength, and even heat vision. We do have a story arc or two after that Robin Rises with Damian returning, and it's a really good kind of epilogue feel. We have the Batman and Robin team united, we have Damian back home, a couple appearances in smaller issues, and then we really get into the extras at the back of the book. But really, the story, I would say, culminates with that Robin Rises story arc, and you really feel it. It's really earned, it's so well done, the art is tremendous, and it's such an epic finale to this grand storytelling of both love, loss, and love again with this father-son dynamic. It really is impressive what Tomasi and Gleason are able to pull off, especially because they had to cater to so many other Bat events in the DC universe throughout their run. We still have a really cohesive feel in this book, other than those tie-in issues that I mentioned, but it's really a powerful run that I absolutely loved from cover to cover. Frankly, this was a hard book to put down. I often found myself returning to it, and it was such a joy to read. Another random note I realized I forgot to talk about is that this run also introduced Carrie Kelly to the Batman books. This is the future Robin from the Frank Miller Dark Knight Returns universe. That was a really fun little feature there. We find out that she was actually a friend of Damian Wayne, who looks for him when he seems to have gone missing. I really like that character. I feel like they could have done more with her within this run, but it was still super fun to see that character in this New 52 era in this book. Anyway, like I said, you've been looking at the extras here. We got some different production images, covers, different pieces of art. Really a good little section of extras at the back. What a great book. We got just about everything, and now I think that all that's left is to give this a grade. For this absolute gem of a comic book run coming to us from the DC New 52 era, the Comic Book Report is happy to give Batman and Robin by Peter J. Tomasi and Patrick Gleason Omnibus an A. This is without a doubt a Batman Comics must-read recommendation from me. I think to see Bruce as a father, and to see that father and son dynamic explored so powerfully, it's worth the cost of entry alone. I would have loved to see blurbs or better contextual tie-ins when we got to different Batman events from other Batman series that were not explained in this book. But other than that, this book was absolutely wonderful from cover to cover. Some really unique new villains explored, some fan favorite villains returning in new ways. An overall powerful read. I thoroughly enjoyed it. So many of these issues hit for me rather than missed, and it's definitely one I plan to revisit in the future. But let me know what you think of Batman and Robin from Tomasi and Gleason. And thank you all so much for watching. This has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to leave your like, your comment, and maybe check out some of my other videos. And until next time, have a good one.